Canada's $27 billion F-35 deal didn't just face delays. It collapsed under the weight of reality. What was once marketed as the ultimate fifth-generation solution slowly turned into a strategic nightmare. Inside Zero, defense planners began asking hard questions, and the answers they found were deeply uncomfortable for Washington. For years, the one was sold as unbeatable. Stealth, sensors, network dominance. On paper, it looked perfect. But paper wars are easy. The real test was always Canada's Arctic. Extreme cold, remote bases, short runways, limited infrastructure. And that's where the cracks began to show. Operating the F-35 in Arctic conditions proved brutally expensive. Maintenance hours skyrocketed. Cold weather reliability raised alarms. Every flight hour demanded complex logistics, specialized hangars, and constant software dependency. For Canada, this wasn't just costly, it was risky. In a crisis, a jet that can't operate independently is a liability. Quietly, Ottawa started looking elsewhere. Enter Sweden's Gripen. The two wasn't designed for global power projection or massive carrier fleets. It was built for survival, dispersed operations, harsh weather, minimal support, short road bases. Exactly the kind of environment Canada faces across its northern territories. Gripen's Arctic advantage wasn't marketing. It was proven doctrine. While the F-35 requires pristine runways and heavy ground crews, Gripen can land on frozen highways, refuel in minutes, and take off again with a skeleton team. Its engines are optimized for cold starts. Its avionics are modular. Its maintenance footprint is shockingly small. For Canada, this meant one thing: control. And control is everything. Unlike the F-35, which is tightly locked into US software and data systems, Gripen offers sovereignty. Canada wouldn't need permission to upgrade, modify, or deploy its aircraft. No remote kill switches, no dependency on foreign approval during wartime. That reality alone sent shockwaves through Washington. Inside the three, concern turned into disbelief, because this wasn't just about jets, it was about precedent. If a close ally like Canada could walk away from the F-35, others could too. Nations watching quietly from Europe, Asia, and the Arctic Circle took notes. Gripen suddenly wasn't the budget alternative anymore. It was the smart one. Cost sealed the argument. Canada's F-35 program wasn't just $27 billion up front. Lifetime costs ballooned far beyond projections. Training, sustainment, spare parts, and software updates locked Ottawa into decades of spending. Gripen, by contrast, offered predictable costs, local industry involvement, and technology transfer. Canadian companies wouldn't just buy jets, they'd build, maintain, and upgrade them. That changed everything. For the US defense industry, especially for, the message was clear. Performance in real-world conditions matters more than hype. Gripen didn't win by being stealthier. It won by being practical. In Arctic defense scenarios, reaction time matters more than invisibility. Sortie rate matters more than sensor fusion. Being able to launch fast, land anywhere, and fight again is what defines air superiority in the North. Gripen was designed for that reality decades ago, and that's why the Pentagon was left speechless. Because Canada didn't just reject a jet, it rejected a model of dependency. It chose flexibility over prestige, sovereignty over slogans, reality over simulations. The collapse of the F-35 deal wasn't loud. There was no dramatic announcement, just a quiet shift that echoed across global defense circles. One question now hangs in the air. If Gripen makes more sense for Canada's Arctic, how many other nations will realize the same thing? This wasn't the end of a deal. It was the beginning of a rethink, and the shockwaves are only just starting. If Gripen makes more sense for Canada's Arctic, how many other nations will realize the same thing? That question didn't stay theoretical for long. Inside Canada's defense establishment, planners began running deeper simulations, not glossy presentations, but worst-case scenarios: power outages, cyber disruptions, frozen runways, forward bases cut off from supply lines. In those simulations, one pattern kept repeating. The moment logistics collapsed, the advantage shifted away from complexity and toward resilience. The Zero struggled in those models. Its strength depends on an ecosystem: data links, specialized maintenance equipment, climate-controlled shelters, and uninterrupted software support. When that ecosystem weakens, so does the aircraft's effectiveness. In Arctic conflict scenarios, that dependency became a strategic vulnerability. Gripen told a very different story. Designed during the Cold War for Sweden's survival against a numerically superior enemy, the Gripen 1 was built on a brutal assumption: bases will be attacked, runways will be destroyed, and supply chains will break. The solution wasn't better infrastructure. It was eliminating the need for it. Gripen's dispersed operations doctrine suddenly became the centerpiece of Canada's evaluations. Jets operating from stretches of highway, crews trained to refuel, rearm, and relaunch in under 20 minutes. Minimal ground equipment. No reliance on massive hangars or foreign technicians. In Arctic defense, that capability isn't convenient, it's decisive. This is where the conversation quietly shifted from cost to survival. Canada realized that in a northern crisis, it would not fight the opening days of a war from perfectly prepared bases. It would fight from damaged airstrips, frozen roads, and improvised locations hundreds of kilometers apart. An aircraft that cannot adapt to that environment becomes a liability no matter how advanced its sensors are, and that realization had political consequences. The F-35 program ties operators into a centralized system controlled largely by the United States. Mission data files, software updates, diagnostics, even certain maintenance permissions flow through U.S. networks. For most countries, this was accepted as the price of cutting-edge technology. For Canada, defending its own Arctic sovereignty, it began to look like strategic handcuffs. Gripen offered something rare in modern defense procurement: autonomy. Canada could host its own software environment, control its upgrades, integrate its own weapons without asking permission, maintain operational secrecy. In a world where cyber warfare and electronic interference define modern conflict, that independence mattered more than ever. The reaction in Washington was immediate and tense. Within the F-20, analysts understood the danger wasn't losing a single contract. It was losing the narrative. The F-35 had been positioned as inevitable, the only future-proof choice. Canada questioning that assumption publicly, even indirectly, cracked the illusion. Because Canada isn't just another customer, it's a NATO ally, a Five Eyes partner, a country deeply integrated into North American defense through NORAD. If Canada could decide that stealth and network dominance weren't enough for Arctic defense, others with harsh environments would start asking the same question. Finland, Norway, northern Japan, even parts of Eastern Europe. Suddenly, Gripen wasn't competing on price. It was competing on philosophy, and philosophy is harder to counter with marketing. Canada's analysts highlighted another uncomfortable truth: sortie generation. In prolonged conflict, air power isn't measured by how advanced a single jet is, but by how many times aircraft can take off, fight, land, and launch again. Gripen's ability to sustain high sortie rates with minimal crews gave it a decisive edge in endurance scenarios. One Gripen flying 3 or 4 sorties a day from dispersed locations could outperform a more advanced aircraft limited by maintenance cycles and infrastructure dependence. In Arctic air defense, that math changes everything. The financial implications only reinforced the decision. The headline, $27 billion figure for the F-35, was misleading. Lifetime sustainment costs, software subscriptions, upgrades, and foreign dependency pushed the real price far higher. Gripen offered transparency, predictable operating costs, local industrial participation, Canadian technicians trained to do the work themselves on Canadian soil. This wasn't just about saving money. It was about keeping capability alive during wartime. And that's when the discussion moved beyond aircraft entirely. Canada began framing the issue as a sovereignty question. Who controls your defense when satellites are jammed, when data links fail, when allies are distracted elsewhere? Gripen fit a doctrine of national resilience. The F-35 fit a doctrine of alliance-centric warfare. Both have value, but only one aligned perfectly with Canada's Arctic reality. The shift didn't happen with a dramatic press release. There was no official declaration that the F-35 had failed. Instead, there were delays, re-evaluations, expanded requirements, quiet acknowledgments that alternatives deserved serious consideration. In defense politics, that silence speaks louder than any announcement. For 3, the warning was unmistakable. Advanced technology alone is no longer enough. Nations are asking harder questions about control, resilience, and independence. Gripen's rise wasn't driven by hype. It was driven by realism. And realism is contagious. Canada's Arctic forced a truth into the open. The most advanced fighter in the world is useless if it can't fight where you live. Gripen didn't beat the F-35 in a dogfight simulation or a stealth contest. It beat it by being present, ready, and sustainable when conditions are at their worst. That's why this story matters far beyond Canada, because every nation defending harsh terrain, limited infrastructure, or vast borders is watching closely. The collapse of the F-35 deal wasn't a rejection of technology, it was a rejection of dependency. And once that door opens, it never truly closes. The Pentagon wasn't speechless because Gripen is perfect. It was speechless because Gripen asked the one question modern defense hates answering. What happens when the system you depend on isn't there?